Good Friday, March 27th, 1964. The clocks in Anchorage read early evening when the floor began to mutter. At first, it sounded like a train under the city. Dishes chimed. Then the earth found its full voice. Sidewalks slapped upward. Streetlights swung wild. People reached for door frames and found them twisting like rope. The shaking did not stop. It swelled and kept swelling, a giant hand kneading a mountain. Ceiling tiles fell, plate glass burst. Someone shouted "Earthquake!" and learned the word was too small. The rupture tore along the subduction zone off Prince William Sound, one plate lurching under another. Geologists would later write the numbers with a kind of awe. Magnitude 9.2, more than 4 minutes of motion, among the biggest ever recorded. But inside those minutes, numbers didn't matter. A 6-story building buckled like wet cardboard. Anchorage's 4th Avenue slumped as the ground liquefied. Cars rode the waves and fell into sudden gullies. Across the water, the ocean went quiet, then breathed in long heaves. Seafloor lifted, bays tilted, harbors drained and rushed back. The quake had reset the coast, and water went looking for new low ground. Warnings lagged. Some people ran uphill. Others went down to the docks to watch. On the island of Kodiak, the sea drew back. Fishing boats toppled and settled in mud. Children stood on bare harbor mud. Then the first wave rose beyond the harbor mouth, a steepening wall with wreckage, logs, crates, a roof. It broke across the channel and surged through town, lifting houses from pilings and shoving them sideways. On Mission Road, a man sprinted with a toddler under each arm. In Whittier, rock fell from the cliff and took warehouses, tanks, and rail yard in a single grinding gesture. The bay hurled a local wave into the ruins, a short, brutal punch born in the bay. People who had sheltered from falling masonry stepped into waist-deep water. In Seward, a fuel yard collapsed, fouling the harbor. Flames skated across slicks. Freight cars became battering rams. Couplers snapped and cars plowed the waterfront, driven by water and flame. Valdez Old Town slumped and slid. The waterfront wharf tore away with workers still on it. Parents searching found only rope ends, posts, a lunch pail, a hat. A landslide wave swallowed the harbor. Then the second swell ran straight over what was left. Down the sound in Chenega, villagers walking to church heard a roar and felt the ground pull. Many ran for the hill behind the village. Many did not make it. The wave reached the church steps, kept climbing, lifted houses, and tumbled them into trees. Survivors later said the sea smelled like torn moss. Hours later, long-period waves reached beyond Alaska. At Crescent City, California, water drew down at midnight, then returned as steep, fast surges. The first 2 flooded streets and withdrew. The third and fourth proved the trap. They hit higher, faster, and scoured the downtown. Doors jammed, storefronts shattered, residents who had come to watch from bridges found the bridges gone. 11 people died there, a town wrecked by a quake 2 states away. Back in Anchorage, natural gas lines snapped, water mains split, transformers blew like cannon. The J.C. Penney facade fell into the street. A downtown hotel leaned and froze like a man mid-fall. Neighborhoods on soft clay slumped, houses cracking at the seams. One woman stepped from her front door into air, the yard an opening mouth. Phones failed, sirens stuttered. The airport runway, shoved inches sideways, still held a kind of promise. Help could land here, eventually. In homes and schools, people dragged mattresses into doorways. Churches opened basements. Strangers became neighbors. Doctors worked by flashlight, sewing scalp wounds on kitchen tables, splinting legs with broom handles. Children learned new words: tsunami, aftershock, liquefaction. The first official reports were wrong, as they often are. A magnitude guessed too low, then too high, then finally 9.2. The number explained the duration. It did not explain why one house stood while the next two vanished, or why one grocery aisle toppled while another lay still. Engineers would map failures onto soil, foundations, and slopes, waiting for a nudge since the last ice age. But the people in the photographs from that night look like anyone waking to the idea that the ground itself can be an accomplice. Civil defense trucks with loudspeakers prowled low-lying neighborhoods. Move uphill. Do not return to the shore. Some did not hear. In the dark and wind, the ocean felt far away until it arrived. On Turnagain Arm, the water ran out, then returned as a ragged wall that climbed bluffs and left logs in treetops. On the Kenai, boats that had ridden out storms at anchor were set dry on grass. Harbor masters drew the breath they didn't know they'd been holding when a final surge slid by with a snarl. Morning came bruised and blue. Snow-dusted wreckage like ash. Lines of people formed to check neighbors, pull salvage, bring coffee, count. Radio stations, some knocked off the air, returned with lists of names and instructions. A father walked miles to find his children in a school gym. Another found only coats on pegs, and a teacher apologizing to the air. The accounting took weeks. Alaska's death toll would settle below 200, astonishingly low for a disaster of that scale. But the damage stretched from Point Barrow to the lower 48. Wharves were gone, warehouses gutted, roads folded like bad origami. Fishing fleets had no piers. Rail lines hung in the air. Economies of salmon, timber, oil, and tourism sputtered. Families learned to say, "We're fine," and learned that fine meant something else now. From ruin came lessons. Scientists mapped the coastline, planted new tide gauges, and wrote new equations for run-up, drawdown, and resonance. Engineers revised codes, pushing for deep foundations, ductile frames, and setbacks from unstable bluffs. Communities along the Pacific Rim upgraded sirens, signage, evacuation routes. Schools drilled high-ground walks with children in rubber boots and backpacks. The country built a modern tsunami warning system. Still, the sea and the soil kept their veto power. Years later, you could find a refrigerator in woods above Seward, a folded shirt in a spruce, a railway spike in a kitchen wall far from track. People told stories that began with "I wasn't going to," then paused where they did it anyway. Luck took credit it didn't deserve. So did skill. The truth sat somewhere between, in the gap where decisions are made under a sky that will not answer. If you stand above the sound on a clear day, the water seems flat as hammered tin. You can trace islands and passes and imagine energy moving through them like a slow animal. On docks rebuilt since '64, new pilings wear old scars at the height of that night's water. Anchor bolts shine where buildings now flex instead of snap. Children in bright jackets walk past blue and white evacuation arrows and accept them as part of the landscape, like gulls and snow. Road to Ruins is about what fails and what we learn when it does. In Alaska in 1964, the ground failed first. Systems tried to catch up. Communications, ports, rails, laws, habits, pride. We learned to build differently and warn sooner. But the lesson that endures is humbler. When the earth speaks for 4 minutes, it gets the last word. And when the ocean answers, it writes in a hand that does not smudge. Thank you for listening to Road to Ruins. Subscribe for more true stories where systems fail and people pay the price.